Oh, well, thank you, Governor John Bell Edwards. Again, thank you for your leadership in these tough times. Certainly you experienced it sooner than either Steve or I did. Steve, it's good to see you. And it's always nice to hear what's going on upstairs, so to speak. Um, but I just want to reiterate some of the points you made. Earlier, I made a comment about Wyoming's economy being really largely about energy and the infrastructure that's associated with that. In our own experience a few years ago, using essentially a bonding authority at the state, we were able to get a couple of pipelines built that both to the Midwest and then out to the West Coast for natural gas that's produced here under incredibly stringent environmental standards, making sure that our labor standards are well protected, and really doing a good job with producing a domestic resource. We've also partnered in a similar thing to what Governor Bullock was talking about. We have the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust, which has helped to put up wildlife passages over roadways and build new irrigation infrastructure, revamp it in a way that allows for the historic passage of sturgeon up the Powder River and many of the other kinds of things that have really allowed wildlife to become a very large part of what makes Wyoming attractive. And when I think about that, I think, of course, about tourism and how important tourism is to our part of the country, the Northern Rocky Mountains, and then the infrastructure that's associated with things like airports, things like roads, to make sure that we can get products across the country. Things like our railroads. Now, there's an interesting issue because our railroads are starting to, become much more difficult to maintain. Just recently, we had an accident in Rock Springs, largely just because it's aging infrastructure. And when you think about our towns and our counties, Wyoming's lucky to have what we call our mineral royalty grants, where we can partner with our towns to be able to fix infrastructure. In some cases, our towns have sewer infrastructure built on clay pipe that goes back to the 1930s and starts to, collapse unexpectedly. We've been able to work with communities and others to try to figure out ways to address those needs. Roads, bridges, all of those things are important. And so Wyoming really has engaged across a broad spectrum of efforts. And I think really what I'd like to leave you with is an experience that happened in Wyoming last year. Of course, during the early 1920s and 30s, there was an enormous effort, you all are aware of, to build out the United States. Big dams were built and large irrigation structures that go to feed our country. And last year, some of that started to fail in catastrophic ways. It took 110,000 acres of production offline when a tunnel collapsed in Wyoming last year. About 110,000 acres of barley, wheat, sugar, beets, and other soybeans, et cetera. All of that, 110,000 acres was in Wyoming and Nebraska. And really partnering with Governor Ricketts of Nebraska and ourselves, we were able to get a temporary fix in place, but it pointed out just how vulnerable our nation is. And it couldn't come at a more important time. As I mentioned before, what an inflection point for our country to understand our supply lines are weak, our logistics need to be fixed. We need to make sure that we can produce domestically those things that we need to have, and we need to be able to have access to international ports for our overall economy. What an exciting time to be alive.